Okay, it's alright with me. Oh, it's alright with me. Oh.
Hello, and welcome to a video series of podcasts. This one is going to be about Sounds Like This, the very first full-length album by Eric Hutchinson. The 15th anniversary is here, and we're at beautiful Hyperballad Studios here in Brooklyn, and I've got the man himself, Eric Hutchinson. Eric, we've done 1 million of these?
Hello, everybody. We've done 1 million of these, and we've never done a video one, and here we are.
Indeed.
Some people might still be listening to this audio only, but you should know that these are videos. We are real humans out in the world.
Yes, yeah. And it's a special 15th anniversary of this record, so I want to ask you right off the bat, why are you interested in revisiting this album? Specifically for its anniversary, or because there's something about it for you?
Yeah, I realized the 15th anniversary was coming up, and it felt like a time to look back and think about where my life and my career has been, and to celebrate it. And I know these songs mean a ton to me, and they changed my life, and the album changed my life. It's just out there in the world being a little album, tiny star in the stratosphere. But there's people out there that also like these songs, and I thought it would be fun to go out there and talk about them and sing them and just kind of celebrate, you know?
And we should say what we do with these podcasts is that we go over the making of the record, the themes behind the record, and of course, we go through each song, so it's going to be a lot of fun. So,
that's true.
Let's start specifically with this album. This was your first full-length record, as I mentioned.
Yeah.
But let's go all the way back, because first records are a culmination of an entire early career.
Yes.
You started playing live, performing, what year? Do you remember?
I started playing in earnest for real seriously the summer of 2001. I was living in New York City for the summer, and I started doing open mics all over downtown Manhattan very seriously, 4 or 5 a week, bouncing around. And it was that summer that I wrote the song Rock and Roll, and I just started really, at the time I was thinking I was going to go into film and TV, and music had always kind of just been my side hustle, and but after that summer I really felt like maybe I need to take this seriously. Maybe this needs to be something I move towards.
So those shows convinced you that this is what you wanted to do with your life?
It was certainly the beginning of me just being like, oh, like this could be a mountain that I could go climb. Like this is what it feels like when I'm actually out playing these shows live. Because before that, usually I'd played music home and alone and for myself, and this was the beginning of me really trying to force my music onto the world.
So all the songs that ended up on this record were created, woodshedded, worked out live over a couple of years from 2001 to when this came out, which is 2008. Right?
Yeah. And like you said, sort of there's the old axiom that you have your whole life to make your first album, and then you have 6 months to make your second album. And so, yeah, I did have a long time, and we can get into more of that, of how long it took to sort of get some of these songs out there. But from the very beginning, people always were interested in my song Rock and Roll.
He's been waiting around for the weekend, figuring which club to sneak in. Fancy drinks and $50 cover charge. Lately it's been a big hassle, Heineken and Newcastle, to make sure he's fitting in and living large in disregard. Liza, he will tell him what he's probably like, cause it's not hard. His charm is gonna get him through the night. So if he wanna rock, he rocks. If he wanna roll, he rolls. He can roll with the punches as long as he feels like he's in control. And if he wanna stay, he stays. If he wanna go, he goes. He doesn't care how he gets there, long as he gets somewhere he knows. Oh no, na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na.
And that was the impetus, really, to continue to work and build more songs off of that one.
I guess it always just felt like a song that people just set up a little more. So, what's that one? That one's kind of cool. And it got me signed to my first label. So I was touring. I got out of college and I moved home and lived with my parents for a while, and I waited tables, and I just saved up some money to make an album. And then I went and recorded this album and spent all the money that I'd saved up, and it was a disaster. And
was many of the songs that are on this record on that?
Some of them. It was a disaster. I didn't know how to play with a band yet. I didn't know how to produce an album yet. I didn't know how to make a record, even though I wanted to. And so the album I was so disappointed with, and I ended up just stripping off all the band and all of the stuff, and it just ended up being me solo, and it was called That Could Have Gone Better. It's a collector's item on eBay. And then I tried to make another record with the producer in New York, and we got all the way finished with it, recorded it, produced it, mixed, mastered, and then the producer and I couldn't come to terms on the contracts.
Okay.
And I had to shelve that whole record, and that just never came out. And I was feeling pretty frustrated. It was just a really confusing time for me, because I could see very clearly what I wanted to be doing, but it felt like there was all these gates in the way of like, why don't you just let me do the stuff I want to do? Why can't I just make music and make albums and have it sound the way I want it to? And then after a lot of touring and a ton of opening for other artists and just traveling around and hitting the same cities over and over, I got signed to Maverick Records in 2005. And Maverick Records, if you don't know, was started by Madonna.
Indeed.
And if you don't know Madonna, she's like
Very
Lady
popular.
Gaga, but really old. And
Well, now.
yeah. And she wasn't involved with the label anymore, but her manager, Guy Osiri, was running the label, and I got signed to a label. It was all I wanted, and it was through
How did they
Warner
hear
Brothers.
you? But how did they hear you?
I had a friend who worked at Capitol Records, and it's funny because I always remember this. I'd watch Behind the Music, on VH1.
Yeah, sure, VH1, yeah.
And it'd always be like, Aerosmith was writing some songs. A few months later, they were signed to the label, and I was like, that's the part I need. How did that happen? But it really
Don't
does.
gloss over that.
Yeah, that was always the part that just kind of happens, but it did sort of just happen like that. I was playing a show in LA, and a friend of a friend came out to the show, and she worked at Capitol Records, and she was kind of young and hungry, and she brought me in to meet with them. Capitol Records didn't end up signing me, but there was a little bit of blood in the water, and other labels took interest, and I got signed to Maverick Records, which was a smaller label, but I was super excited, but I didn't know at the time. Couldn't tell. Looking back now, I was like walking into a house on fire, being like, I'll take it. This looks great.
Yeah, we
And-
should mention that Maverick had Alanis Morissette, which was a huge hit in the 90s.
The Prodigy was another big 90s
yes,
band,
yes.
Michelle Branch.
But at this point, the music business is taking some punches, and a lot of these smaller labels or subsidiary labels were going. And I understand that Madonna sort of didn't get that involved after a while, so that lost that niche. I just want to make sure that the audience knows where we're at here.
Totally.
But also, just to get back to you for a second, because that's what we're here for.
Please.
The Before I Sold Out live album,
Right.
which I got at your show, and we'll get to that in a sec. When did you record that? And you did that on your own as well? And this was before
Yes.
Maverick.
So that was, I made this live album because I was having all these strikeouts, making records in the studio.
So let's
and
just record live.
And I was touring solo by myself all the time, and I was like, I need something to sell at my shows, and I need something that represents who I am and what I do right now. So we recorded a couple of live shows, and that became like a live EP, and it had me talking and singing.
Is anybody waiting for a call right now? This makes you feel a lot better if you sing along. So much better. It's been almost a year. Still waiting. But maybe you are supposed to have called somebody back yourself. Maybe you feel a little bad about it right now. Sing along too. Maybe you don't have a cell phone, or just aren't popular enough to get calls. You can sing along too. You ready? Here we go. I'm gonna start singing in a second, so don't act surprised. Call me back. We're recording these people. Come on. Call me back. I want you to call me back. you got to call me back, even if it's just, even if it's just to say goodbye.
Another collector's item available on
I have it.
eBay.
I bought it, but
Yes.
the other cool thing about that is that you don't gloss over that. That was a huge part of your appeal, is how you connected with the audience, your humor, your ability to make fun of yourself, or refer to whatever was going on in pop culture or general things at the time, and that comes across on that record. I think I don't know if this was if this influenced Maverick or anybody else, but for me, as a music writer, I immediately connected to the fact that you had that something different about your performances.
Welcome, my name's Eric Hutchinson. Thanks for coming out tonight. You may or may not have heard, we're doing a live recording of this show. It will become a CD, and so it's of extra importance that everyone fake having a good time. I've been doing it since I got up here. I don't plan on stopping until I leave. I need everyone else to do that as well. I'm going to be playing a lot of old songs, some new songs. If you have something you want to hear, please keep it to yourself.
At that time, I was doing, I don't know, 100, 200 shows a year, solo. I would just go wherever I could at open. I'd play college shows for nobody. I was just like getting my 10,000 hours in. And so yes, when I did get some label people to come out to the show, I felt like I probably did a pretty decent show that, had some of my songs, had some jokes, and had like, okay, this is who I am.
Oh, so the label came out to see you?
They must have. Maverick must have come out probably at Hotel Cafe in
Did you know
LA.
it? Did you know it that night?
Oh yeah, I mean, playing LA and New York was terribly torturous for so many years because it was just like, okay, I'll play every other city, but New York, there might be somebody in the audience. Right. This might change my life. Sure. I've got all these people on the guest list and none of them came out. A friend of a friend's cousin who works at Chrysalis Publishing might be there and he could see something. And so it was always tiring playing LA because it was like, this show has to go well. And it didn't feel like every other show because it was just full of people that see shows all the time and there wasn't like an average excited crowd.
Well, so now you're on Maverick. They're going under.
Yes, I didn't know that. So I
Did you record anything for them?
Yeah. I started working, we found some producers. I went in the studio with them. They flew me out to California. I'm staying in California. I'm meeting with some writers, I'm with producers. And I go down and we're working, I think it was in Orange County we were working in. I was working down there and I was about a week into the studio time and making songs and feeling excited about it. And most importantly, feeling like, okay, like I had gotten to that next level. Like I had grinded it out for so many years to get onto a label.
Getting signed.
Yeah, and to get moving. And then we were recording one day, and then the next day I got a call from the record label, and they said, actually it wasn't from the record label because they had stopped returning our calls at this point, and I didn't know that's how that worked back then. But I got a call from my manager saying, Maverick Records is folding. They're going out of business. They're going to be absorbed by Warner Brothers Records, and they're freezing the entire artist catalog until they know what they're doing. You can stay in your hotel room tonight. Tomorrow you got to go home. And it was just over like that. It was just over. And it was crushing, deeply crushing. And so
I went now hearing this.
I went from like, and also it was like, so this is my third time trying to make an album in 5 years or something, and that had fallen apart. And there was no answer even. It was just, we don't know what's going on, you go and wait. And so I went back home. My parents were letting me live with them because I was traveling so much. I was like, I can't pay rent. They're letting me stay in the house. And so I moved back home with my tail between my legs. I got to go back and talk to all those losers that I used to call my friends before I got signed to a label.
Right, you're about to shed your past.
And now now I'm just like embarrassed. I was just so embarrassed and crushed. And I didn't know what to do. And I spent about 6 months before the word finally came back from Maverick. They said, okay, Warner Brothers is not going to keep you on the label. You're free. And
how much did you record by that point? Did you have anything you could keep, or they owned it?
They owned it. I've got some like daily mixes from that era.
But you couldn't use it to promote
Couldn't
yourself.
use it. They owned it. And I also I didn't love where it was going, but I didn't have enough time to even like get into it that much.
He's been waiting around for the weekend, figuring which club to sneak in. Fancy drinks and $50 cover charge. Lately it's been a big hassle. Heineken and Newcastle to make sure he's fitting in and living large. Disregard the lies he will tell her what it's probably like, 'cause it's not hard. His charm is gonna get him through the night. 'Cause if he wanna rock, he rocks. If he wanna roll, he rolls. He can roll with the punch as long as he feels like he's in control. If he wanna stay, he stays. If he wanna go, he goes. He doesn't care how he gets there, long as he gets somewhere he knows. Oh no, na 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 na.
So then that was it. I was gone. But my lawyer called me and he said, you know, you actually have this clause in your contract that Maverick has to pay you to go away. It's called, in the lawyer contract music world, it's called pay to play. I think it's called pay to play. Anyway,
It's called Get Yours While You Can.
yeah, so they cut me a check, and I held that check in my hand from Warner Brothers, you know, and this was like
Right.
more money than I'd ever.
Cue the music.
Yeah.
Bum, bum. What
And
does
I
he
just
do
held
with
this-
it?
Yeah, I held this check, and I'm living at my parents' house, and I'm feeling like I've spent the last 5 years banging my head against this wall, and the wall just fell over in the wrong direction on top of me. And I just really spent a lot of time thinking, maybe this is a sign I need to do something else. You know, maybe this is a time I need to take this check. I need to do something responsible, like put down a down payment on a house or start the next part of my life and understand that I wasn't meant to do this.
Right.
But whenever I really thought about telling anybody that, I was so deeply ashamed of the idea of telling people, they're like, what happened with music? And just being like, oh, I just quit.
They gave me a lot of money.
They
and I bought
gave
a
me some money,
house.
so I bought a house.
Right, right.
Part of a house. And so I decided, you know what? I'm just going to go for it one more time. I'm going to take this check I've got, and I'm going to try to produce my own record, because I just don't think I can go on with my life having never actually made an
Right, or
album.
it
It'd be
tortured
one
you.
thing if I'd made
Right.
the album and it came out and it didn't
It failed.
do well.
Right, at least you
I was
did
like,
it.
hey, I put one out. But this was like, I never even scratched the lottery ticket
Right.
all the
This is
way.
your
It kept
third
ripping
time.
in half.
Right,
You know?
right.
So I decided to take the money and use it to fund making my album that I've been trying to
So that's the
make.
day that you became Eric Hutchinson.
The day I
you
became Eric Hutchinson.
Yeah, the day you became an artist.
I guess so.
Yeah.
And this time, this would have been probably 2007 or so. And at this point, MySpace was happening, guys. MySpace on the internet. It's going to
yeah.
be one of many
Dated
ancient
references.
internet
Yeah, yeah,
references.
yeah. This is
MySpace
before
was
phone.
happening, and so, like I said, I didn't know how to make a record yet. I didn't feel comfortable producing it. I didn't know how albums were made all the way. I knew parts of what I wanted, but I didn't know how to do that. And so I reached out to a bunch of people that I liked through MySpace. I just cold messaged different people
Like
I could
artists,
find.
singer-songwriters.
Producers,
Right.
mixers, and a few of them got back to me. And
Sight unseen. They didn't hear any of your music.
I think I must have sent them stuff, and I had,
Okay.
my MySpace page, and
Yeah, before I sold out. Right?
Had before I sold out.
At least you had some.
and I had money to offer them.
Yeah, yeah.
Most people are willing to listen if there's a check involved.
Yes, yeah. And they don't have to deal with label crap. No, seriously.
Yeah.
They're going to deal directly with the artist.
Yeah.
You're going to make a record
Yeah.
and try to make it great.
Um,
So who ended up?
so most of the album I did with a producer named Will Golden, who's a lovely human being, and we did that in California at a place called New Monkey Studios, which was owned by Elliott Smith.
Oh.
And he was a Beatles nut, and he had all this Beatlesy gear, and it had been his last place. He even lived there for a while. His life ended pretty darkly.
Yeah,
but,
so Elliott Smith, a great singer-songwriter who had a very tortured life and committed suicide.
And so he had this little studio, and he decked it out with all his great gear, and then when he passed away, the studio was taken over by a new owner named Robert Capadonna, who I was put in touch with. And so we made the bulk of Sounds Like This there. And then I went and made 2 songs in Cambridge, Massachusetts, with a great producer named Paul Coldery, who had done tons of huge 90s albums that I loved, Radiohead and a bunch of other stuff. And I eventually ended up working with him again years later when I made my 90s album,
Right.
Class of 98. But at the time, it was just like amazing to me that anybody was willing to work with me, and that they'd get back to me and say, okay, let's try this. And I reached out to this mixer named Neil Pogue, who had won Grammys, and he had mixed Citizen Cope, who I was listening to a lot of at the time, and Donovan Frankenreiter, and TLC, and Outkast, and all this stuff. And I was like, I cannot believe this is a serious person, and he's going to work with me. That being said, when I came to him and he was ready to mix the record, I brought him a check for the full amount up front. He looked at the check, he handed it to his wife. His wife drove to the bank.
Made sure it cleared.
Neil and I sat there in silence. He got a phone call. The check cleared. He put the phone down. All right, let's get going.
This is the history of the music business right here.
Now, that's a
in
guy
one-
that's been burned a couple times
Yes,
and was
exactly.
like, you know what, I don't do anything till I get the music.
That
This
guy
guy
was a-
from MySpace telling me he's got the money, sure.
That should be a film.
Yeah.
Like Waiting for Godot. It's the 2 of you guys just sitting there,
So.
waiting for the wife to come back to give or make the call. So, all right. So, we fast forwarded to the making and the mixing of the record, but really quick, when you went in to make this album, how did you pay? I mean, there's musicians here. There's a sax player on this.
Yeah.
There's a horn section on this. Piano players, guitar solo. How did you do that? How did you find these people?
So
Through the producer found them?
Yeah, I understand now what a producer does to make an album.
because
a
you
producer
produce-
is
yes.
not just the person's taste, but it's also their connections, and it's so it's a producer comes along with, I know how to make these sounds, and I can call this person, and I can get them on the phone to come play the drums. And so the producers really helped me put those records together, and they said, I know a saxophone player, let me see if he can come in, or I know a drummer or guitar player. And at that time, I didn't know how to play with the band yet. That's what the main thing. I was listening to the record today to refamiliarize myself, because I haven't listened all the way through it in as long as I can remember. And that's what I was really hearing to me was, oh, this is a solo effort with a bunch of things around it, but I didn't know how to play with a band. It would take me several years after this record to really start to understand that.
And can I say that I could tell?
Yeah?
Yes, because my lovely niece, singer-songwriter Sydney, and I were listening to this music the last couple of days, and we both concurred that some of these songs are better live, or there are other versions. It's like, oh, that's a little slow. It doesn't. I remember it being quicker. So your sense memory is. It's almost like, and I'm not saying that this happened, but maybe it did. Did you feel like you just put yourself in the hands of someone else? And you might have done something differently had you not. Did you ever feel like you were not completely in control of the final product of this?
This was the first time that I felt like I was completely in control of the final product.
Than the other two?
Than the other times that I was making stuff.
Okay.
And this was the first time I felt like this is as close as I can get to what I'm trying to do and what I hear in my head. And I think so much that being in the studio, and I tell this to young musicians a lot, being in the studio, working in a studio is just like playing an instrument. If you go into a studio once a year, you're going to be freaked out by all the knobs and stuff and the lights and it's intimidating. But the more you do it, the more you understand it, the more comfortable you can get. And so
the studio becomes an instrument. You said that to me many times. It's like you learn how to play the studio.
Yeah, and you learn how to perform in the studio. So I hear some of that stuff when I'm listening to this record. I hear a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of ambition. But yeah, I also personally hear a lot of I'm still learning.
Naivete.
Yeah, which is, I think, that's youthfulness. That's
Which all these songs kind of reflect, and we'll go through all that as we go through the record. So the record is out. Tell me how people found out about this, because they did.
Yeah.
And it blew up.
Yes.
How did that happen?
So I spent all the money for Maverick Records making the album.
And then some?
Some.
I would bet.
I had to go to my grandmother, who was a professional musician, who was trying to talk me out of becoming a musician. And today's her birthday, actually. So
Grandma,
hello to
happy
Grandma
birthday.
Audrey, wherever you are. And she loaned me a little bit of extra money to finish mixing the record with this big time mixer that I'd found on MySpace.
The check that cleared.
Yes, she wrote the check that cleared, I guess. And I did pay her back, I think. She told me I did. So I went away over budget. I was flat broke. And at the same time, I was falling in love with my now wife, who lived in New York City. And I thought, you know what? I'm flat broke. Now it feels like a good idea, a good time to move up to New York. So I moved up to New York.
And drag some other poor soul into your poverty.
Yeah. And so I got to New York with this Sounds Like This album that I had just finished, and nothing to do with it. I had no idea what to do with it. You know, this is...
That's a whole other cost. Pressing.
Yeah, or just like, who's going to listen to this now that I made it? I had a small collection of fans, but so I started sending it out to like anybody I'd met over the last few years in the industry. I'd send them a hard copy of the CD back then,
sure.
and nothing was really happening. Although a friend of a friend passed it along, and I got a manager through that, which was a huge thing. And but then I still was like, I don't really know what's going to go on here. I started doing some shows and kind of started building things. And then a friend of mine from high school, Julie Katz, God bless her, Julie Katz, she cold emailed a blogger named Perez Hilton. He had a very popular website called PerezHilton.com. It was a blog. It was a culture blog, and he kind of made fun of all the celebrities, and he was kind of nasty. But he also loved music. And every now and then he would highlight music that he liked, which was usually like very pop, like he helped break Katy Perry and Lady Gaga, and like very kind of mid-2000s pop music. And my friend Julie sent him this music, didn't know him, just said, my friend made a record, check it out. And he liked it. So he posted it on his blog, and overnight, it just exploded, and one of the best days of my life.
So when you say exploded, people were like, this is before streaming. So were people ordering? How did people buy your CD?
Yeah.
How did they find it? How did they listen to it?
In the old days,
Back kids when?
This is the iTunes era. So there was not streaming, but this is iTunes.
Oh, okay.
So
it was on iTunes.
it was on iTunes, and I
Okay.
had just gotten it onto iTunes like a week or two before. So, because if he'd posted it and there'd been nowhere for it to go, nowhere for anyone to get it,
Sure.
who knows what would have happened? Would have been a misconnection. But this album happened to be in the system. So when he posted the clips, he posted 4 songs, and overnight, my album, which was independent release, jumped into the top 10 of iTunes. It was like Dave Matthews Band, Kanye West, and like all these people, and it was just, I mean, it was amazing. It was like my birthday times 100. I was in California at the time, so I woke up and the East Coast had already started going, and I had like 100 text messages on my flip phone from people saying, oh my gosh, your song's on PerezHilton.com. And all of a sudden, you know, every person I'd ever met was coming out of the woodwork to be interested, and we were having meetings, and suddenly I was in the middle of a bidding war with a bunch of major labels. I was meeting with Universal and Atlantic and Glassnote and Warner Brothers, and it was just, it was wild, you know, and it was such a good example of like an overnight success that took many years.
Yeah.
But it was life-changing, and I was lucky enough to have a good management team to capitalize on that moment. But I ended up re-signing with Warner Brothers Records, who didn't know that they had just dropped me from their label about 8 months prior. I had to sit down with the president, Tom Wally, and tell him, like, I was on the label. You guys had the chance to have made this record with me, but you dropped me, and now you want it back now that people are interested in it.
That's what you said to him?
I mean, no, I probably said, like, oh, you dropped me. I was very upset.
But you had to let him know.
I felt that was important, and he didn't seem to care. He was like, this
happens all the time, kid. You know
kind
what
of.
I mean?
He's like, well, you
I
weren't
didn't even know who you
popular
were.
then.
Right,
now
exactly.
you are for a minute. So, big thing, yeah. So I
Warner Brothers.
I signed back with Warner Brothers, who had just dropped me, and they put out the record as is. I was like, I want to put the same record out. This is the record I spent so long to make. This is the record I want to come out. And so they released that album in 2008.
It's amazing. This is amazing. That's a 7-year odyssey we just covered.
Yeah. And somewhere in there, I met you.
Yes, and so I didn't want to thank you. I didn't want to gloss over this. So in 2006, my wife and I went to go see Joe Jackson at Town Hall. Huge Joe Jackson fan when I was a kid. I saw him on his very first tour in what would have been 79.
Look Sharp.
Look Sharp tour, in which he berated the audience the entire time. It was one of my favorite things ever. Shut up! He's like yelling shut up to people. And anyway, so this was very good. Town Hall, if you don't know it, it's a gorgeous, old, classic, made for classical music in New York City. And I saw many, many shows there. I saw Warren Zevon do an acoustic show there. So I knew it was Joe Jackson, grand piano, his original bass player, his original drummer was fantastic, had to be there. He was great, but the skinny kid comes walking out, piano, guitar, and just kicks my wife and I's ass. It was the best set of solo material, joking, funny, musical. It was great. And so how did you get on that tour? And of course, I ran out to the lobby and I bought before I sold out, just to finish the anecdote. I called the number on the back. They got me in touch with you, and you were doing the residency at the time at the Cutting Room? The Cutting Room.
In New York.
And I met you like 2 days later, and we had a long discussion about film and other things, and the rest is history. We've done all these podcasts together. I've done probably a dozen articles about you, cover stories.
Yeah.
But how did you get on that Joe Jackson tour before we finish this particular podcast?
At the time, my manager was managing Joe Jackson, and that whole thing, doing a residency at Cutting Room, all this stuff I was dropped from Maverick.
This is that period.
I was waiting to find out if I was going to be fully dropped or not. I was frozen by Maverick. And so what I did is just go out and do more shows, write more songs, and just kind of wait around. And that's when I met you. But yeah, so I asked if I could come and open a couple of shows for Joe Jackson. He was playing these big rooms. At that time, I would open for everybody. And I had a pretty well-oiled set that I came out and
Who else
did
you opened
my
for during the
jokes.
time?
Who didn't I open for?
Really?
Jason Mraz. I was just known for like hounding every club, any place I could fly to, pretty much.
Right.
I would be like, I'll come open for that art. I would scan websites and say, oh, I see this show.
Man, this is a true DIY
This show doesn't have an opening act. Could I come play there?
Right.
And one of the first venues that really started actually letting me do that was a great venue that I still love to play, Ram's Head. At the time, I think they were called the Ram's Head Tavern. Now they're called Ram's Head on Stage in Annapolis, Maryland. And Chris Stevens, who's still a booker there, many years ago was like, you know what, this guy's trying, I'm going to give him a chance. So
yeah.
Thank you, Chris.
A lot of people to thank. This is a long journey, and it takes a village, boy.
A lot of people.
So you got on the Joe, which is amazing because you didn't even have a record, and
No.
you got on the Joe Jackson tour.
Well,
and I
had
know
this-
Joe wasn't at his height as fame at
I
the
had
time.
a single. I had the EP, so I had something to sell, and my manager got me on there, and it was like a favor. And I went out and did some shows, and it was just something to do, and I was just constantly trying to pick up more fans and get people to come out to my shows. But before we get too far down this whole path, I just want to say thank you, and I'm so. You're the only person I could be doing these interviews with, and we've done a lot of them now, but this one, you were there from before this album even came out through Warner Brothers, and I feel so honored and lucky to have been documenting so much of this, so I'm excited to do this today, and thank you for being here.
Of course, thank you. As always, I'm always honored to the fact you always say I play the records for you first, so I can tell you what they're about,
Yes.
which I get a kick out of. And I want to say also, it's been really great to revisit a lot of this stuff because I do have distinct memories of, and it's funny, I found an article I wrote about you from the Aquarian Weekly in September of 2007, and reading it again, it was amazing because the two of us got deeply into where you were at the time. And you were also nice enough, and I want to thank you for the purposes of this, for asking me to do the liner notes for the vinyl reissue.
Yes, that's one of the exciting things. We're spending all of 2023 celebrating Sounds Like This. I'm going to be doing a ton of shows where I'm going to play the whole album live in order. And we are finally printing it after many, many years of people asking. We're printing Sounds Like This onto vinyl. So, which I always thought of as a vinyl record. I sequenced it. At the time, all my favorite records were vinyl records, and I sequenced it like a vinyl record to have a very strong end of side one and a very strong end of a beginning of side two.
Studio board keeps everything organized in our heads. Over here we have the order of the songs. First song, halfway through the LP when it's made on vinyl. Curtain call. These are symbols that we use to remind ourselves to do things, such as tambourine, hand claps. Over here we have notes, a flow of what we need to do, a lot of turnover in this area. Then up here, of course, is the tally of the backgammon. The W stands for myself, Will. The E is for Eric. Please take note.
15 years of Sounds Like This. The next podcast we'll discuss themes and where Eric was at the time, but this is James Campion. I probably should have introduced myself at the beginning. I didn't do that, did I? Who the hell's this guy? We can do
we'll put a chyron.
Little thing on the bottom. Yeah, I'm James, that's Eric. Let's go on to the next podcast.
They wanna rock, they rock. They wanna roll, they roll. They can roll with the punches as long as they feel like they're in control. And if they wanna stay, they stay. If they wanna go, they go. We don't care how they get there, long as they get somewhere they know. Oh no, na 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 na. Na 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 na. Na 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 na. Thanks a lot, guys. My name's Eric Hutchinson. Let's trash this place.